it to the cloud. There we go. Okay, so hi everybody. Just in case anyone else is watching this who's not on this call, my name's Claire and I'm one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, and I'm going to just give this little sort of overview really of the structural setup in Extinction Rebellion. I variously do understand some of the global dynamics, but not as well as I understand the UK system. And obviously it started here. So I was around right at the beginning. So hopefully that's useful. And I've got some reflections on some of the work that got us to that starting point, and also how well or not well things are variously working for us now, and how things have evolved. So I'll be as brutally honest as I can. So I think it'll be helpful. So I guess the first thing to say is that Extinction Rebellion was born out of a load of very iterative work, which was testing out different tactics of civil disobedience. I would describe it as like poking the system and seeing what happens, and then going, oh, that's interesting, let's not do that again. Or that's interesting, let's do it more. Obviously we had some very specific aims in mind in terms of like trying to understand how to create very rapid social change, or the conditions within which rapid social change and political change can happen. We also, of course, have set ourselves up to deal with something which is an emergency by its nature. And so I think that's probably quite a fundamental difference between Extinction Rebellion and the Museum of Care. It's also clear to me that XR is in some ways a cultural project, but it is also not a cultural project in the same way that the museum is seeking to be. It is, I would say, XR in its inception was designed to hopefully put itself out of business, right? To get something to happen, and then we can all go and do some other stuff. So we didn't design this with a lifelong engagement with it in mind. Basically, it's not. There's some quite fundamental differences. We started with something which I describe as a sort of bastardized holocracy. Holocratic organizing, as I understand it, means that you have groups that are working on specific parts of the project. Say, I'm in the media team at the moment, so say you've got a media and messaging team that comes together to think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, how to put forward spokespeople, how to manage social media, how to engage with the press, blah, 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 all of that stuff. And at the beginning, we only had a very small handful of people, and each person took on a coordination role for a mission critical piece of work and formed a working group around that. And each working group was autonomous to get on with the work as they wanted to. There's a massive benefit to giving huge responsibility to people in that way, which I found to be, well, that was one of the assessments that was made at the start when people were saying this was a good way to go forwards in terms of the working practice. And I found it to actually be extremely successful. So when people feel they have a big responsibility, it allows, and the freedom to do the work the way that they want to do it, then it gives them a lot of freedom and people feel empowered. And so you get very much the best out of people because they can rise to a challenge rather than what they get in a sort of traditional hierarchy, which means your delegated work, which can then be taken back from you if someone thinks it's shit. That's not very good for the motivation of the person who's doing the work if they always feel that someone else could just take it back and go, I think you've not done that very well, I'm going to give it to somebody else. It also allows at the beginning of a project for lots of people who don't necessarily know exactly how to do the work to be able to get on with it without being sort of deeply criticized, if you like, by the other people who might be looking on going, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that like that, but it's not your patch. So if you haven't got time to do it or help with it, then shut the fuck up, basically, and let those people get on with what they're doing. You can input, of course, if you've got advice, that's no problem. But you can't go into someone's space and say, oh, no, I wouldn't do it like that. You must stop and do it exactly how I want to do it, because you can't be their boss. So in that sense, we had a small collective, and this worked very, very well at a small scale, I would say. We had, I think, about like 10 coordinators across 10 key teams, and the coordinators would meet every week. And then they had a small sort of group attached to each one of them that was getting that work done in each different area. And the coordinators would all report back at the centre and sort of, you know, try and steer the project forwards. In that way, then you also have the coordinators who meet, we would call them external coordinators. So they leave their working group and go and interact with the rest of the system. The team would also have an internal coordinator, ideally, and they deal with the dynamics within that working group. So they make sure that people are able to do what they're doing or know where to look for information or any other people that they need to deal with. You might also have other roles that you decide to put onto teams, like we used to have always a regenerative cultures advocate, who would be the person in that team who, you know, asked people to either take time out if they're struggling or offer support, help them to find ways to take a break or whatever. And also to kind of keep an eye on the way that the room's working, the way that the team's working together. If there's sort of social dynamics problems or personal dynamics problems, it's good if your regen cultures advocate is like, you know, a good people person, basically. Another thing, I guess, which is really fundamental at the beginning was an understanding that culture creates the way that things work in a huge way. And so what we wanted to set up was a system that that established itself on a working culture that would be able to sort of understand itself and hold itself quite firm, with lots and lots of people, hopefully, if we grew, coming probably in and out of the space. And so we had certain ways of doing things which were set up at the beginning. And one of those things that we did was, because we're a network across the UK to start off with, we already had a lot of online meetings. So this is very helpful online, I think, as well as in person, but we used a lot of the kind of traditional hand signals that people use in a lot of different styles of organising. So the things we would use are often like have a facilitator delegated at the start of each meeting and a note taker at the start of each meeting. Also, then making sure that everyone understands the signals that we're going to use. So we would use a hand up to get put in a stack and then stack people in order. We would use 2 fingers to make a direct point, which means you get to jump the queue to give some extra information. People sometimes abuse that. They just want to talk really quickly. So a good facilitator has to sometimes ask people whether it really is an additional point or whether they just have something very urgent to say. We would use that technical for a technical point, which basically means it's too hot, I've got to go and open the window, or I'm going to the toilet, I'll be back in a minute, or I can't hear you, there's something wrong, whatever. We'd use P for proposal. And all the, you know, the wavy hands for like, I agree. And then down here for like, I don't agree. I don't think that's good. Or sometimes if we're doing temperature check, you know, you sort of go in the middle and say, yeah, well, maybe. What else? Oh, we developed this one for online, which means I can't hear you, which is actually much more effective if someone's Zoom's breaking up than everyone going, I can't hear you, but they can't hear you anyway because the line's fucked. So yeah, so we had all of those things to kind of help us in a way. And the other things that we used to open the meetings with always, and sometimes as a coordinator, I fail to do this sometimes, is to read out like a sort of statement at the start of every meeting, which I think sometimes makes people feel like it's a bit sort of cultish or weird, but it's actually really helpful. Some of the things it's changed over time what we say, and we have a team that works on our sort of vision visioning and guardianship stuff, and those people would probably be a team that could update this and like make a recommendation to change it to the whole movement if they think it needs changing. But some of the things we used to say were, let's just take a moment together, have like a sort of moment of meditative kind of breath together to realize that we're in the room and ground ourselves. Let's also remember how difficult the work that we're doing is and how much we appreciate one another. We used to always have a note at the start that said, slow down your yes. I know like a lot of activists are very keen to do good work, and often people overcommit to things, and then they burn themselves out. And also, alongside slowing down your yes, you should know to return tasks if you can't do them. So just a reminder to everyone that it's like totally okay to just go, actually, shit, I can't do this. But you must like contact some other people and let them know that you're not going to get it done, just so that people can make other arrangements and it won't be taken with any judgment that it's your fault for not doing something, but you can give work back. And I think being reassured that that's totally okay thing to do is very helpful. And it definitely helps to remind people not to let each other down, basically, but it's a much kinder way to sort of frame that so that people feel a bit more comfortable. The other thing that we would then do would be like a check-in, which can take a long time if you're not careful. So asking everybody one by one to go around the room and say how they're doing. Or maybe if there's a big group, you can ask for a sort of one word, like we've been doing in the icebreakers and stuff. So you just say, what are you grateful for today? And someone says, oh, some brilliant coffee that I've had, or, my mum rang me and it was really great, or whatever. Other times, if you just have like a how are you feeling check-in, it can be extremely valuable if someone comes in and says, feel like shit, I'm in a really bad mood. Because you know who you're dealing with in that moment. And if everyone sort of gets to know each other in that way and can be very emotionally honest, then I think it can be really, really helpful for groups to like form high trust kind of relationships in the room so that you can do difficult work together. And similarly, I guess we'd also do a checkout at the end, which is also variously can be good or can be a bit difficult, but it's very useful to know how people have found the meeting, or if they're okay at the end of it or whatever. So trying to establish this like transferable methodology, if you like, for holding meetings. I guess the other thing that check-ins do is that they get everyone to talk at the start, and so you then have like broken the ice for everybody, which means the quieter people in the group might feel more compelled to speak later in the meeting if they tend not to speak out. If they've been encouraged to say something at least at the start, I think it can help to bring those people forward so that you do hear from everybody. And then, of course, depending on your facilitation skills, it's good to try and invite people to speak who are often quiet, but without pressure, which is sometimes a bit difficult to do. You don't want to go, you quiet one, you haven't said anything yet, because usually it makes people go, oh, no, I'm not talking. So we worked through all of that stuff at the start. And I have to say, like, a lot of this came from other people's research. So I'm afraid I can't explain where all of it came from, but I feel very lucky that like lots of the people that came working with us at the beginning had done this, lots and lots of thinking about how they wanted to hold spaces and do this work. And I really got an accelerated learning journey on facilitation by trying to do it and being very bad at it for quite a long time. The other thing that's interesting, I guess, about the setting up of these spaces is that the main focus of having the main focus of meetings as far as outputs are concerned is that people are going to take away action points and they know what they're doing. So you try and clarify that at the end of the meeting to check that everybody knows what it is that they're taking away with them, that they're committed to do, and when are they going to bring it back, when are they going to do it by, or who are they going to liaise with outside so that they know where to go. The thing about having this kind of holacratic setup is also that you give this huge responsibility to people and a lot of trust, and you basically, if you need something to happen as a team and you go, right, who wants to do it, and someone says I'll do it, then you effectively have to let go of that thing and allow that other person to do it. And that has its pros and cons, but I think it's been very valuable to me, sort of certainly at the early stages of XR, to say, okay, we've all got an idea of how we want this stuff to work, but you've got to let that happen over there because you haven't got time to do it. And you're doing this thing over here and you've got to tend to that. You can talk to those people, but you have a quite a job of letting go to do in yourself sometimes, to allow that other work to happen somewhere far away that you can't see it, and just allow it and see what comes back. And I think that sort of giving away of responsibility and letting go is actually harder than we think sometimes, especially when you have a kind of vision of your own of what things need to be, or how they should look when they come to fruition. Now, I think because we've got this format where there's like 10 principles and values, which are kind of relatively simple, although they all have an expanded like version. So you can, if you haven't looked at them, you can see them on the website. And there's a longer version of each one to try and explain what it is that we mean by it, because some of them are a little, you read them and they can be read in like many, many different ways. And then we have these 3 demands, which you might have seen. And that's the thing that you give away then, is you give away the principles and values and the demands, and people can do whatever they like, so long as they don't break the rules that you've given to them, which is quite a high risk strategy in terms of, people can go and make a flag and go and do something and say that they're part of the movement, because there's no sign up, there's no official membership list, you don't pay, you don't do it, you don't sign anything, you're not really officially a member of anything. And so in that way, that's where it's interesting in the comparison with what we're trying to do, because legally Extinction Rebellion is a movement that has no legal form. So there's a limited company, which is not for profit, which just receives the funding and distributes it back out how the movement wants. So the movement has to organize itself to put a demand on the finance team and say, we want to spend the money like this. And the finance team say, okay, here you go. So it's we have got a legal company with a bank account, only so that it can service this sort of formless movement, which I think is probably a relevant like thought about how some funding could work through this. Certainly for like core infrastructure building. I think there's some other ideas about how projects can like all be self-funding and be more autonomous within the museum, which I think is probably quite a smart idea, for there not to be very much involvement in that kind of a way. But if you need to fund a bit of web build or Discord account or whatever it is that's on behalf of the whole collective, that's quite an easy way to set something up to do it. And then because we've got this thing that you give away, including also a design program, which Clive and Charlie worked on, which means that we've got the sort of look and feel in a package that you can download as a PDF, and it's got within it a font, the color scheme, blocks, templates for posters, flyers, blah, blah, blah. It's all kind of in there, so that if you wanted to like start up your own team somewhere in your local town, you've got a bunch of assets that you could just download, and there's a team that in global support who could make sure that you've got other assets that help you understand like how we've set up meetings and why we've built things the way we have, and various other access to like materials and stuff that you might need. So in that way, you have this rollout of autonomous groups that need kind of minimal input from the system to be able to go and self-replicate themselves and do whatever work that they choose to do in their local area. But we also still have these working groups that work on a national scale. And the movement has variously in most places, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, you'll have a national team, which in some places is very strong and does a huge amount of work. And in some places, it doesn't really do very much at all. And all of the power, if you like, is held in the local bases, because the national team doesn't really do very much to help them or to organize at national scale. So that's worked out differently in different parts of the world, depending how the movement's landed and how many people are involved and all that kind of thing. But in the UK, we've got these working groups, which came from this original kind of 10 coordinators kind of coordinating space, which was, as you can tell from the way I've described it, quite centralized. And I actually think on reflection that if we had built something into the thinking that was more explicit about the fact there is something hierarchical in this space, that we understand better as a movement that there is, there is a sense of some accountability and responsibility that goes on in that space, some governance that happens in that space, which everyone wants to be there, but some people don't want there to be any hierarchy. But you can't really do the governance of the space unless you have a solid structure within which to show your transparent workings. You can't have full kind of governance and transparency, in my opinion, in a totally decentralized movement where you don't know who's doing what anywhere ever, because if you don't know everything, you can't be transparent in that way. So we've got, in a way, these kind of two systems, which I often find where they overlap is where a lot of like the rub is, a lot of the difficulty is. What we tried to do was have, say we've got, I'll show you a diagram in a minute, but say we've got like a media team, we've got an art department, we've got a legal team, we've got a finance team, we've got actions team. We'd call these all in circles. And originally we had them all in one major circle around the outside. And that major circle on the outside, we used to sit governance meetings with a representative from each of the teams inside. And they would come to this meeting, which we called an anchor circle meeting. And as the movement grew, it became totally clogged because there was just too many teams and too many people in that space. It's worth saying that from our research pre-movement building, we had the research kind of suggested that an optimum working group size was about 7 people. It's enough people to have like a variety of views, but it's small enough to be able to make rapid decisions and not to have working group meetings where you get sort of where it works too slowly because you have so many people on the call every time or in the room every time. Particularly if you're a creative team, I personally think from a creative position, it's hard to hold a creative team together once it gets beyond a certain scale. And then you find teams want to sort of split down into 2 groups or split into 3 groups. You end up with this kind of ever-growing system that becomes more and more complicated. So we've gone from something which was simple, which was about 10 circles within one big circle, to something which, as it's grown, has gone into more and more subgroups and more super circles that manage their own governance separately rather than having one big one. So now I'm going to just show you a diagram of what it is that we use. And I don't really like this program very much. If you have a look at it, it's completely visible to anybody online. If you look on Glass Frog, and you can find XR UK. I think you can also probably find other Extinction Rebellion movements groups or national groups, or maybe even the global one actually I think has the global support system has a Glass Frog system set up as well. So Glass Frog's named after this frog that's see-through, in case you don't know, that's what the weird name is about. And you can see here now the UK system is here. We've got like the whole of the UK within this big circle. And you've got inside all these nations or regional groups. So Wales, the North East, London, East of England, blah, blah, blah. So you can see all these places represented. So this is trying to show the regional groups and the local groups who are mostly working in a much more autonomous and more decentralized sort of manner to our national kind of working structure, if you like. So the national teams are inside here, UK support. If you click on that, it will zoom in. So you can see here we've got self-organizing system team. So this is the team that helps with people understanding this, what I'm describing to you as our systems of organizing. Strategic finance circle, that's a bit new. Strategy stewardship, guardianship and visioning teams. And then here's where I am. This is in the operations circle. So if you go down into here, there's a whole world in here. And here I am in media and messaging. There's digital, communities, arrestee and legal support. Action circle is a big place, got lots of work that goes on inside there. Regenerative cultures circle and the political circle, who focus on looking at the political landscape and how we interact with UK's level politics. So because I know it the best, I'm going to go into media messaging and show you around. I've just been in here today trying to update it, and I find Glassfrog really complicated. It's got a funny back end that I don't really understand how it works properly. So I always worry that I've like broken it whenever I use it. But anyway, so here you'll see we've got a newsletter team, photography coordinator, podcast, yada, yada, design group, social media. So in this, you've got these teams that work on subsections of media and messaging. You've also got some link roles. So lead link, that's me, because I'm the external coordinator of the circle. So I go to meetings with people outside of this space on behalf of the media team. Internal coordinators, I've got 2 people sharing that role at the moment because it's a lot of work, and they try to tend to the needs of the other teams within the circle and make sure that we've got enough people to do the work, make sure that people know where they're looking for the contacts and the informations that they need. They're organising meetings, lots and lots of just general internal coordinating. And then we've also got certain roles like a budget holder, actions liaison. So we have a specific person that goes to our action meetings to talk to the people that are doing that work, because it's very important for us to have really close ties with them. We have a political liaison because we have to be very close with the political team as well. And then there's other people that we don't actually have filling the roles at the moment, like a self-organizing systems advocate. So that might be someone who helps us with facilitation, decision making, all of our kind of like ways of working, which is kind of what we've all been talking about as a group. And there's our regenerative culture advocate. So you can kind of get the vibe that like you could be, in theory, you could be the lead external coordinator and you could be the political liaison potentially and be the person who goes to the political meetings. So these don't require a single person for each role. You can like hold several of them at the same time, but it's just to make sure that these responsibilities that need to be met are being covered by people. So you've got a bit of a checklist. And then on this system, if you click outside the bubble, it'll zoom you out again and out again. And here you go. So you should be able to see now UK support. So if we're in the UK support circle, on here, you'll be able to find a description of what that's for and the accountabilities within it. So that I find this system a bit complicated and a bit hard to look at, but effectively, if I just go back into media and messaging, you'll see there, we've got an email address. So people could go on here from anywhere in XR and they could find an email address to contact my team straight away. They could see my name, which is also key for us, that we're a very transparent movement. We've built the whole thing on open organising and a very, very high level of transparency, which of course is made more possible by the fact that we're in good old UK and nobody's going to disappear me in the middle of the night, hopefully, for organising Extinction Rebellion, but we know that that's not necessarily true in all parts of the world. So this is an approach that we've chosen that we think is strategically a very good idea, but it might not be depending on where you are. So I suspect that's the difference that museum is going to have to pay attention to, that some people won't want to be visible, or, you know, for people to see who they are all the time. One of the main reasons, by the way, for transparency is just because it's quite hard to organise mass things in protest in secret. And so organising demonstrations in secret is a notoriously good way to make them very small. And if you're just brazen about the fact that you're going to try and get 5,000 people to the same spot at the same time, then you may as well do it in public. The other reason that's actually quite a good reason for us is that it kind of counteracts the purpose of the counterinsurgency. So anyone who seeks to infiltrate our movement will mostly just find out what's on our website by coming to any of our meetings, because everything's out there in the open. And some of the journalists that originally infiltrated our movement sent us emails like, is it true that you're trying to organise a rebellion against the British government? We were like, well, the clue's in the name, but thanks for coming to the meeting. And everything on the website says that's exactly what we're doing. So yes, but the openness has made my life much easier, I think, than trying to organise everything with fake names and, you know, hiding all your information. But that's a privilege that we get in the UK to do that. So then we've got all our accountabilities listed, and people basically can look us up and they can see all the roles on the right-hand side there that we've hopefully got covered, which is quite a lot. And that's how the whole thing's been set up. Now you can see, I guess, from me showing you this diagram that it's like extremely complex. I've found it variously sort of quite difficult to understand the UK movement as it's grown, because it just gets so big. And one of the problems that you often have with these systems is that you've got so many self-inventing groups that do work in a closed space. It can sometimes mean you're quite siloed from each other. So information flow is a massive problem, which we're always constantly struggling to try and do better. Another thing that I'd say we haven't mastered, which needs more work in the future, is feedback processes. So if the best example I've got is, someone said to me the other day, you know, when you had people doing sign language on the stage at your rebellion, well, your live streamers didn't film it. So the majority of people who are disabled might be at home. Therefore, you might want to tell your live streaming team that where there's sign language, they should have that in the frame all the time whilst they're filming the speaker, because otherwise it's only benefiting people who are there on the ground. Someone with that kind of feedback, which is very good for us to hear, or get to the right person, I still don't think we've got a good system in place to make sure that somebody can easily hear that feedback and think, I'll put that into that team, and then it will definitely get to the people that need to hear it. Because that kind of stuff in our movement anyway can come from all over the place. And I think there's sometimes a lack of connection, that people struggle to get the information to the right place, because the system's so complex now. It's sometimes a bit like, how do I find the right person to talk to about this thing? The other thing that's probably different about us than what we would want the museum to be is that a lot of our work works from proposals that come from documents. And I find that a very academic way of working. But a lot of the people that input at the beginning of Exile were academics. So they're perfectly good at writing a document and saying, this is all my ideas. I've thought them through really carefully. I know what I think, and this is how I propose we should do it. And then they invite feedback. So they go and ask everyone who's going to be affected by that work to put in their thoughts and feedback. Now, if it's your job to hold that piece of work, you can ignore some of the feedback if you choose to, or if you've got conflicting feedback, you can decide which one to take, because that's your responsibility. You've got that mandate to do that work. But you should engage in a really good advice process where you go and ask everybody that you can think of that will either help you to make a better decision, or who's going to be affected by your work, to go and get their input before you make any sort of drastic changes. And then if there's a big change that you want to make to something, like you want to change your mandate itself and say, I think media and messaging should be responsible for designing actions now, then I would have to take that to my super circle. That's where I get my sort of governance from. And for me, that would be the operations circle, because that's the next circle out. If we want to change operations circle stuff, we go out to the next one. And then the other people go out to the next one. So you have got a sort of a semblance of hierarchy, but it's not really working top down. It's working more kind of with concentric circles, if that makes sense. And the lived experience of this, just so you know, is extremely imperfect, can be very chaotic. And I hope I've made it sort of make sense and sound like it's quite well thought through. And I think it's well thought through enough that it's held us together for this long, which is actually, we're already older than most social movements ever get. So it's done well, but it's very, very difficult. And, you know, as you may well all know, social movements are very messy places. So it's definitely not as clean as this little set of circles looks on this page. Yeah, that's it, basically. I think I've probably said enough, and I'll stop sharing. And you can all ask me questions. Sorry, I haven't looked at the chat because I've been concentrating. Go on, Claire.
I was just wondering that the finance people, potentially I don't know how much can happen without money, but potentially traditionally that would be a centre of potential power. What's the relationship between that and the kind of the top level circle meeting representatives? Is it separated?
Good question. Well, actually, I may as well tell you what happened with the finances so that you understand why we've got to the place we are now. So initially, say we had like 10 main working groups that were mission critical. They were all allowed to self-write their budget. So they could nominate a budget holder, which we had pairs, actually, 2 people for each budget, nominate some people to do that work. They put together a skeleton budget of what they think they need or what they would like. Obviously, at the beginning of XR, when we sort of burst onto the scene, lots of people threw money at it. So we had some money in, which was quite a shock to everyone. Oh, what should we do? We could do something good. And everyone kind of drafted up their dream lists of things that they wanted to do. And we would put them in like essential spend, important spend, or like nice to have as the third category. And then get the budget holders to look at the lists together with the finance team and say, yeah, let's do that, but let's not do this because it's not as important as this, you know. So somehow these people can collectively decide which teams are going to get the most money. It worked when we were small, but there's a massive problem with scale, because if you have like 20 working groups with a budget each, they actually ended up competing over the resources in quite a sort of stereotypical manner. And I also noticed that the people who came from a more professionalized background were much better at doing that work than, say, the grassroots direct action people who would say, can I have some money to help me live? I can probably manage on £400. Whereas you had someone who had, like, you know, experience as a journalist, and they'd go, I could do this for, you know, £1,200 a month expenses. And that showed in the quantities that people were asking for. And that's really difficult to mitigate against, I think. I don't know how else you do that if it's self-organized. I don't know, because we weren't intervening, basically. It was on teams to be honest, transparent, responsible for each other and for themselves. And in that way, you know, it was a very, very deep trust-based way of organizing around spend. The other thing that we did was like offer people some money so that they could get some expenses, which we called a volunteer living expenses. So we weren't employing anyone, but we would give people a bit of funding to help them. And again, that was based on trust, because if you're a single parent and you can't give up your work without having at least, you know, £1,400 a month come in, and that's the only way you can participate in XR, we wanted to facilitate that to make sure that people who are less well off were able to come into the system and get paid, because we didn't want to end up just with a movement full of middle class privileged people calling all the shots because they don't have to work. So this was really well thought through, and I think we gave it a really good try to work out how to do this so that we didn't either have everyone on a salary delegating to volunteers that are unpaid, which is how a lot of volunteer organisations work, or a system where no one's getting paid at all, and then you just end up with certain people that can come to do that. And as I say, I think that kind of self-organising around money works well up to a certain scale, and then after we expanded beyond a certain point, it became very, very difficult. So now what we've got is the finance team still sitting with the company, if you like, managing the bank, and then a kind of a committee, like a budget group within the movement, who have to talk to the whole system as much as possible to decide what is really truly mission critical that will get funded. So in my eyes now, we're sort of, there's certain places where there's people trying to offer a highly professionalized service. I would say my circle is one of those in the media team. We've got really pro kind of press people in there, people working full-time on social media. And to be able to offer the movement the service that we do, people have to have their rent paid and be able to put food on the table. So there are some now, less than there were before, but there are some mission critical circles. They've been decided by this budget group that was representatively sort of nominated by the movement. And it's up to them to like wrestle with these difficult decisions. And the finance team just say what's in the bank and what the cash flow is. And they decide how to distribute it based on teams that say, I need this, I need that.
And is the committee fixed that makes these decisions,
no, I don't,
or does it rotate?
So. I don't think so. And that's the other thing I forgot to mention, which is that people don't hold roles for like indefinitely and gets, you know, wedged into a place where they can't be moved. In theory, we have a recommended 6 to 12 month kind of tenure in certain coordination roles where you might be seen to hold a certain amount of power. So I don't know what the turnover is that they've designed into the budget group, but there is one.
And what about a specialist group? Sorry, this is my last query. What about the specialist groups? So like in your role, for example, would that rotate eventually, or what's the...
Yeah, I think it should. I'm not sure what's going to happen with my role at the moment, because probably I will get up to a year at some point in the sort of late spring or something. And at that point, maybe it would be time for me to shimmy along. But when I came into the team, it was a fucking mess and no one wanted the job, and everyone elected me into it. And I did it like more than full time, unpaid for like the majority of last year. So I kind of want to do a little bit more work with the team now it's functional, because I came into such a shit show.
Yeah.
But in theory, yeah, it's about, we kind of recommend a 12-month time, but also like a team can re-elect the same person if they're very happy with them, and the team gets to decide who sort of coordinates or leads it. If they want the same person to stay for another 6 months, they could just vote me back in and say, no, we want to keep you. And if I say yes, then presumably that's fine. Do you know what I mean? But we could also do some other stuff to try and work out how to invite other people into the space if we want to do that. And we've got a new project called Co-Liberation, which I think is really exciting, which is going to seek to take a sort of a co-liberation approach to anti-oppression work. So it's putting it through like a really, really positive lens of how to kind of collaboratively lift each other up, rather than what I think people often get into the mindset of kind of power suppression, or you're too powerful, you need to be brought down. Well, what if you just lift people up more? You might not need to like pull people down so much as well. And I don't know all the details of how that's going to work, but there's a wonderful woman who I shared some stuff with the group before, Mickey Kashtan, who's a non-violence expert, who's been working on that with some other people who've got really, really kind of deep knowledge about non-violent work and decentralized organizational design and stuff. So watch this space for that. Gabby and then Matt.
Where does the money come from?
So the majority of the money comes from crowdfunding, which is good because that's like the most friendly way to get money, I think, for a movement like us. There are some wealthy individuals who've given us money, and there are some foundations who've given us money in the past, especially kind of climate focused, funding bodies. But the vast majority of the money's come through independent and anonymous donations.
So you just put it on the website, like the bank account, and people just donate anonymously?
No, we use a platform called Chuffed. But there's loads of different ones, Fundraiser, Chuffed. They're all quite similar. I don't know why we chose the one we do. But yeah. And we tend to set them up and then run them and then take the money and then set up a new one and then take the money. And the most of the money comes through when we do stuff on the streets that's quite big and noisy. So like last year, we lost a lot of opportunity for fundraising because we had to cancel a major rebellion. If we're not visible on the streets, the income goes right down. Sometimes if we have a week on the streets, we get like 200 grand in the bank off the back of it. So, that's our main, that's our main business, if you like. Right, Matt and then Nika.
So you said for the roles, how do people get into it? Is that just like the group elects each person? So do people offer, say, hey, I'm interested in this, and everyone says, yes, you're voted on it? Or how do they get
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, initially, when you start something like this, you do it with whoever will do it, right? Because it's like everyone's doing it for no money and there's 10 of you and you're like, go, go, go. So whoever you've got in that like little group is who you've got. And then the system kind of evolves from that place. And at some point, you have to then work out how you're going to institute some form of election or something that makes it more fair, because otherwise you just have these people who just assumed the position, and it's fine like that at the start because there's no way around it if you've only got 10 people. But eventually you have to work out how to bring in election processes of some sort, and so we leave that with the responsibility with the groups themselves, so they deal with it amongst themselves. The difficulty then is if we want to elect like this budget group, because how do you then include all of the different people within the system to have an opportunity to be voted into that group? If you want to be available to be voted in, how do we know who's available when the movement's so sort of sprawling and undocumented, basically, broadly? So we also were experimenting with an idea called an action council. So our third demand is for a sortition-based citizens' assembly, and we wanted to organise something around sortition within the movement to sort of prove that we were walking the walk. And I don't think it's been used yet, but we've had certain actions which you might know have been quite controversial. And sometimes when we do something that's controversial, people within the movement all go off on one at each other going, I can't believe you did that. Oh, who organised that? They've ruined our reputation. We're very angry. And people get furious about the thing that was decided without them. And then everyone starts going, we should all decide things. And, we were explicit at the beginning that we were a post-consensus movement, that we were not going to work with consensus because can be so restraining, stop things from happening quickly. So then we thought, right, let's do a sortition-based kind of body that can be called into action when there's a proposal for something that is going to be controversial. So the main thing that this was born out of was the Heathrow drones incident. I don't know if you've been paying any attention to our movement. You may know that Roger, my friend, wanted to fly drones around Heathrow Airport in an attempt to get it to close down. The idea was really to fly them at a very low height, but to break their safety regulations so they'd have to shut the airport down, right? So it wasn't an idea to fly the drones into the planes and endanger anybody's life. And in fact, they modified the design in the end to attach them to strings so that they could only go to a certain height in the sky, so that they couldn't actually go anywhere. But nonetheless, it would be in breach of the regulations of the airport. So in theory, if you film yourself doing this kind of stupid act with a toy drone and report yourself to the police, the airport should have to close and they'll come and arrest you, right? So the idea was for there to be lots and lots of people around the airports, kind of within a 2-mile circle, or I can't remember the regulations, but something like that, and to phone themselves in and hand themselves into the police throughout the day. Yes, I'm here with a drone. Yes, I'm here with a drone. The news got out to the movement, and loads of people lost their shit. They were like, this is violent. This is a threat of violence. We don't like it. I'm very uncomfortable. A lot of people think that the word drone, because it can mean a military drone, is kind of somehow comparable to the thing that you buy from a toy shop. People kind of felt very uncomfortable with it, and a lot of people fell out over this stuff. But when it was proposed, we knew it was going to be controversial, right? So we looked back at that and thought, next time something that controversial comes up, let's have a sortition-based assembly of people. So we can randomly get, say, 25 people from the movement. We could take, I can't remember what the decision was, but maybe we could take 10 or 15 from working groups. And then we could take 10 or 15 from local groups in the UK, put them together, and they get to spend a whole day with the person who's making this controversial proposal, whatever it is, and they can try and convince them that it's a good idea. And then if the sortition group says yes, then it's fine, we trust them. If they say modify it, and then yes, they can say to change the plan, or they can say no way, and that's it. It's not allowed. So that was the only way that we've designed in a sort of means of stopping an action that might cause, I guess, harm to the movement, harm to the movement's reputation. Because in theory, you know, the rules say you have to be non-violent and everyone should be safe. So there should be no way that anyone can design something where real harm comes to people, right? But people felt that was the image of it was too dangerous. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. But
yeah, the sortition's an interesting way to address that when you're looking at scale. You're basically randomly making it into a small group, which can actually make a decision versus, and it's random, I guess, sortition, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which is difficult because we don't know everyone who's in the movement, right? So there's the key problem, we have a massive problem. How do we do sortition in a movement where we don't have everyone's name? Well, that's fucking complicated. It's quite difficult. But also watch this space, because someone I know who's working on a global citizens assembly, I don't know, Simona, you might have heard about that, but they're going to be trying to form 1,000-person randomly selected global family. So they're working with NGOs and governments in all different countries, even where people don't have an address, to try and work out the means by which to randomly and fairly select a body of 1,000 people that represents the whole of the world family, and get those people together and guided through an assembly process to decide how they think that humanity should deal with the climate crisis as a planet. So that's quite a big, amazing experiment. So yes, David, that's the word. Yeah. And basically it's like the ancient forms of democracy were based on this random selection, right? So it means in theory that you can't be corrupted, you won't be biased, you won't be lobbied, you won't be bought, you're sort of brought in, shown the facts, asked your opinion, and then you're out again. So it should, in theory, sort of serve to protect the decision-making space against corruption, basically, you know. And it's also, as I understand it, the assembly process is designed to be a political process that you do as a group, which is built on a kind of scenario which creates empathic interaction. And so there's a lot of issue on the left, I think, particularly with people thinking that sortition is bad, because what if the sortition group don't think that socialism is good, right? And therefore we need a leftist party, not a sortition-based council, because we can't trust ordinary people. And I think what's interesting about that is that I feel it's a lack of understanding about what happens in empathic dynamics in a well-held assembly, because the idea is that you're deliberating with other people that you don't know, who are not like you, but you get exposed to all of these people who are not like you. And over the course of that process, and with this big responsibility on your shoulders as a group, you like rise to the challenge. And to be honest, the outcome I think is pretty usually very, very highly humanitarian and highly socialistic, because the majority of people want like schools and food and shelter and for like an ordinary life they can afford, I think. But anyway, that's our suggestion for this process. Simona, you're shaking your head. What have I said wrong?
In Bolivia, they actually use sortition, and like their tribal justice, they have sortition, but there's like eligible people, and I forget the exact eligibility, but for the tribal courts, they do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Simona, and then I'll go back to the stack list?
Yeah. The idea that the majority will choose badly is to be debatable. The sortition is a good way to overcome the biases of election. With every decision-making method has biases, of course. The theory behind deliberative democracy, and there are interesting examples in Canada for this. The idea is not that you just should choose a group by sortition and let them vote on something. The idea is that a group chosen by a good sortition that is a statistic champion adjusted to avoid inequalities of every kind will get the best decision for the group they represent. That may be the inhabitants of North Carolina, or those interested in growth in an area, or so on. The key for this is informed decision and discussion. So it's not just voting is actually not important in this process. I think we could have a meeting about this form of decision making. It's very interesting, and no, that's all. I just wanted to advocate for this form, and something about the bias of election. Election comes from eligo, I choose. It is supposed to take the best people from a group. Who's the best? Usually the best are the better off, the richest, those who have most resources. And this way you end up having representatives that represent actually the best, the better off of a group, the richest, the more educated, those who have more resources of time, those who are more competitive, those who are better in speaking in a group or in face of many people. That so the best actors. There is a liaison between theater and representative politics. It's representation. The question is, who are you going to represent, and how the actor is chosen. Sorel, a French philosopher of the 19th century, said there is nothing so similar to a representative of the oligarchy than a representative from the people, because the simple fact of representing, of having a delega, I don't remember the English word, a delegation, makes you different from those you represent and more like to the representative. So there are many reasons against representation and elections. And actually, a randomly selected group may, and actually is in many ways, much better than an elected group, even in representing this group.
Thanks, Simona. Yeah, I guess the other thing also about sortition is that, you know, ideally you want to choose people in ratio with some sort of rules, right? So you don't just randomly select people and accidentally you get all men, right? That would be a disaster. The whole point is that if you have gender represented as it is in the nation or your local area or whatever it's for, you also want to make sure, you know, proportionally you've got faith groups included, maybe people have certain sexualities, maybe certain abilities, you know, you can include whatever sets of rules you want to try and make sure that the randomly selected group that you get is the most representative kind of microcosm of your community that you're trying to represent. You try and make it like a mini version of the thing that you're trying to represent is kind of part of the idea. And obviously we couldn't do that in XR because we don't even know people's names. So it'd be very difficult to make sure you've got age balance and racial balance and all of that kind of stuff set up. It would be very hard for us. So I lost track of where they were at with setting up that council, but they were some of the challenges definitely that we were going to face.
Yeah, who's next on stack? I love talking about sortition. I find that stuff interesting. But
it's TJ.
TJ.
Okay.
Maybe this is a sort of dumb question, but when I looked at those concentric circles, it was like, whoa, Extinction Rebellion is huge. Like, you know, you can rival some, certainly corporations and for all I know, some governments. And so I was thinking, so what does that feel like in the sense of like, you've got these counter institutions, like the media, which mainstream media doesn't like Extinction Rebellion, and so is a counter to your institution. And you may actually be a lot larger than a lot of these counter institutions and maybe more coordinated than these counter institutions, which, you know, are oftentimes in their own little secret societies. They don't really coordinate very well, although I guess they do sometimes. So how does that feel? I don't really have a concrete question, but it's a sort of open question, like, wow, what's that like?
Well, I guess in some ways it feels like there's huge opportunity because it's really obvious that we've got so much potential. And at the same time, because we struggle, I would say, with organizing around making difficult movement-wide decisions, like when to have a rebellion, for example, there's always a difficulty around who sticks that pin in the map and says, it's that day, we're going to go on that day. There are some decisions that we need to make as a movement, which are the most pivotal decisions. That's one of them. When are we going to all go out on the streets again together en masse? When are we going to do a big thing together? And for that, I suggest that you'd need a little bit of functional hierarchy. And we are definitely like in a culture that thinks that horizontalism is the best thing ever and anything else is very, very bad. And sometimes that can be really difficult, I think, because it makes it hard to do that decision making, then all align around it, whether we sort of quite like it or not, because it's never going to please everyone when you make a decision like that. So we're still trying to work out how to do that work well, and how to do it in a timely way, and how to do it without building a big hierarchy that has like, okay, now we're just going to have a leadership that goes, we're doing this now, follow us. And so we're sort of in a space at the moment where I think there's a lot of people with a lot of ideas about how we should go about doing that stuff. But I guess in answer to your question, sometimes I feel like we've got huge potential, and sometimes I feel like we've got not very much potential because we can't coordinate everyone to agree to go and do a big thing together, which is the difficulty that I think you get when you get very big.
Oh, so I might be wrong then. So I thought like you'd have these enemies, you know, various, you would be like, oh, this one's, you know, pretty wimpy, so, you know, screw them, you can easily deal with them. And then some other ones are hard. You don't really interact with whatever enemies you have, really, like, or do you?
Well, I guess we've got a problem with the term enemies because we've made it like a clear policy of no blame and shame. So in theory, that's also why we've been so disliked, I think, by some people, because we refused to go out and say, they're bad people, we're going to go and do bad things to them. So instead, we tried to shape it as a kind of compassionate mass disruption, which wasn't so pointing at individual enemies. We might say like the media, or we might say the financial sector, or we might say the economy itself, or we might say the government itself, but we wouldn't like point at individuals in a way. So yeah, it's difficult actually, that whole thing, because we've tried to do it in a way where we don't engender a kind of us and them, you know, we're in a battle with them. And I think sometimes I wish that we did, and sometimes I'm glad that we don't. It's very it's really hard. Yeah, but we've gone after things that are more like pillars of power, or more like institutions of power, rather than like companies or whatever, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
I think Nika's next on Stack.
Thanks.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe my question is continuation of what TJ asked, because about enemies and about we and they. First of all, I think what Extinction Rebellion did is totally genius, because you created, there is no political party, there is no real lobbyist organization, everybody can join, no membership. You can just imagine how innovative is that, and how brave is this. Is just totally insane. And that's probably why it was so effective. But because we were comparing Extinction Rebellion and Museum of Care, I want to ask you to point out the differences. And in order to do that, I want to ask you compare not only Museum of Care and Extinction Rebellion, but Museum of Care Carnival for David and Extinction Rebellion, because that was like, you know, two different projects, Carnival and Museum of Care. And it required different, you know, actions and different procedures. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I guess the carnival was able to be set up to just all be geared towards one type of event on one day, with one set of kind of technical requirements as a, you know, from the back end or online streaming and stuff like that. But it all could just disappear after that event had happened, in theory. I mean, I kind of knew that it wouldn't, and that something else would happen afterwards, but it, you know, it felt very self-conscious that it was just all about honoring David and organizing these events that were kind of networked together. Whereas XR has been trying to set up growing and self-replicating and ongoing networks that can continue to work together over a sort of longer period of time to organize multiple types of work. So, you know, some of the parts of XR are only set up to train people and to do talks and to do education. Some of the parts are only set up to like go and paint things and get in trouble. Some of the parts are only set up to do like support for people by bringing them snacks outside a police station and waiting for them for 5 hours. So it's a more multifaceted kind of activity with different groups that are doing really quite very different things within it, from one team to the next. You might have a whole different set of outcomes and skills that are needed and all of that kind of stuff. So it's kind of way more of a it's trying to make something which is replicable, that then can be given away to other people as a template for how to do it as well. Whereas I felt like the carnival, people could do it however they liked. but we've made a suggestion in Extinction Rebellion for how people might want to set themselves up in terms of the teams. And in some ways that means we've exported some like really shit stuff, which I'm constantly apologizing to people in other parts of the world for, because we didn't know what we were doing and some of it was rubbish. And then you look at someone in another place and they go, this doesn't work very well. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, we've totally thrown that in the bin because it didn't work. And so then the lack of constant connection is a problem, because you can't be constantly connected across the whole system. So I might be in the UK and realize something really didn't work and we've changed it completely, but I don't then necessarily tell the global team that then go and tell everybody in Portugal or everybody in Australia or everybody in India that that's how we've like changed our system design or whatever. So it's kind of self-organizing in the way that people kind of evolve it to suit their circumstances and hopefully feel able to do that. But I think that's also sometimes can be a problem, that people think they've been given a thing that they go, right, we have to work with it like this. And then if they say something's not working and you say, why are you still doing it like that? Then they sometimes say, well, this is how we do it. This is how we've been told to do it. And it's like, well, just don't do it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. Do it different. But we wanted to sort of make sure that people felt that, but sometimes it's quite hard to make sure that people feel that and that they're empowered enough to go, actually, I think that's shit, I'm throwing that in the bin, we're going to try it like this instead. And to do it iterative as well, because it's a long running project. I guess that's the other difference. We've been able to do stuff, get it wrong, and then do it different, and then do it and then go, oh, that bit, we'll keep that bit, but we'll throw that bit away, and then evolve it on again. And things can sometimes get a bit stuck when people forget that it's okay to do something and it go, oh, that didn't work, let's do it different, you know.
I just want to follow up question. So now I was thinking I know everything about how Extinction Rebellion organized from talking to you, but now I'm puzzled. You mostly was saying here and showing diagrams about UK team that I would call post office, so national team. That is a very complicated post office. It's a corporation or like, you know, whichever else entity that hold a certain territory in a very vast and complex structure, but still, you know, it has a structure. It has like Roger Gale on top and so on and so forth. You guys didn't get paid for, like, none of you, so it's a lot of like passionate people who is here to save their land. It's almost like a war. But now you mention international team, and I don't know how that's function, and I think that looks like more as a post system. So if I'm correct, the carnival was designed more as an international team with a very strict hierarchy and a very, very urgent goal that's supposed to happen in a month because person died. So and it was like, you know, kind of mobilization scenario. International with set date with strict hierarchy. So there is no question that we will just suddenly start to have an election about how we can do carnival. That will be ridiculous. So but then can you tell more about this international team? What is that and how does it function?
So the international team got set up as, what was it called? It's called Global Support now, but it was called something else. Anyway, people like renaming things, don't they, when they're trying to change them? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it doesn't really make any difference. It's just the same thing with a different name. But it was set up originally just to transfer stuff out of what we'd set up in the UK to the rest of the world. So if anyone wanted to set up, and we, by the way, never went anywhere and said, hey, Ghana, do you want to start Extinction Rebellion? Who's going to do it? But we got people come to us and say, we want to start XR here. And we've looked up on the internet or Facebook or whatever, and we can't find anyone. So do we start it for the first time in this country? And the global support team would say, yes, you're correct. There's nobody doing XR in, I don't know, Indonesia. You're very welcome to start it. You're the national coordinator. here's all the stuff, how you do it. Off you go. And let us know if you need anything. And so it should be quite hands-off, basically, and with a note that says, you know, if you need to do something different because of where you are, then please, you know, do feel free to organise differently. We're just offering this framework as the way we've done it that's worked quite well. And if you think there's a thing in your country or your locality that means doing it different would be better, then you can change what you do to make it work where you are better. That's fine. So in a way, there's just a conduit for like resources, should be, you know. What I think has been a mistake, if I'm honest, is that now we've got a global website and social media channels, which need to be managed by a global team, but we don't really have a global constitution because we only set up to try and move national governments. There isn't a global government, so we don't need to campaign at it. So in that way, the global team now has to manage assets that are acting in service to the global movement. But how you can have a social media channel that represents 75 countries worth of decentralized activism is definitely not something that we've worked out how to do. I don't think it's probably possible. And actually, I might have mentioned this, but the Médecins Sans Frontières press and media people, somebody that Clive knows that used to work with them, said that they have similar setup. They've got national websites. They had local groups. They also had very highly localized, like small volunteer groups. They have regional organizing, and they're constantly responding to crisis. And then they had like an international website, which is for the whole organization. And then because the whole organization has so much to answer to, that's so far spread out and so complicated, it becomes almost impossible to change that international website because of the number of people you need to ask before you can go, let's definitely change that. So you end up with a problem, actually. And a lot of the information is replicated across many different websites, maybe the national site, your regional website, your local group might have a website, and all of the information is replicated, but with probably some slight differences, which makes it very confusing. So they started to organize Facebook and websites around language, I might have mentioned this, with geolocation rather than by nation. So you'd have like a Spanish language site, which would either respond to you as someone in South America, or it would respond to you as being in Spain or wherever. And they'd found that a better way of working. I knew that, unfortunately, quite some time ago, and it still didn't mean that I was able to make sure that XR didn't end up with this problem, which it does now have that problem, because it wasn't my job to deal with it. So I wasn't really able to like intervene and say, no, you have to talk to the MSF first for some advice before you build your global stuff. And also the UK, because we set it up here, we had all the SEO and we had the biggest social media followings. And so at some point, the UK gave all those channels to the global team, which I also think, if I could go back in time, I might suggest that wasn't actually the best idea, because the majority of the following is UK based because it was built here. But now we don't get to control it. And it's being held by another team. So it's kind of feels to me like there are some things that we did that we could have done differently. I mean, for example, if I knew it was going to be a success, which I didn't think it would be at all, then if I knew it would be, I would have set up Extinction Rebellion UK as a Facebook page and not Extinction Rebellion, full stop, as a Facebook page. But we really didn't think this was going to be such a big success. So we kind of fucked that up. And also the naming kind of convention for websites. So at some point this year, last year we changed to extinctionrebellion.uk, where all of the other websites around the world have that kind of naming structure. But ours was still rebellion.earth, which then everyone said was very colonialist of us, as if we thought we were going to do the whole earth. But we just thought it sounded cool and didn't think that it was going to become a global movement within a year. So we weren't thinking about that. So that was also a mistake. Yeah.
So just like a last question, I try to understand, because we were talking about Extinction Rebellion, but actually most of the time you were talking about Extinction Rebellion UK,
Yeah.
and it's some other entity. Do you know people there? How, when did they appear? How many of them? You know, how do they finance themselves? Any details will be cool.
Now they have a separate setup, which is a bit like ours. So there's another organization that funds them, that takes in their fundraising as global and then funds their work. So they have a setup a bit like ours, but I think their company's based somewhere else. And quite quickly, because we had some very tech brilliant people, particularly in France and other countries, they set up a global platform, which is a bit like Discord. It's the thing that I was talking about the other day. It's called Mattermost, and it's like an organizing digital space, and that's for the whole of the global movement. So what's happened has been quite difficult for the UK, which started off using Basecamp, to migrate everybody from the UK onto this other system, which was set up by people elsewhere, who then sort of are going, why don't you come on our space, because we built it for you? But the UK is so entrenched in all of this stuff that it's got its own infrastructure. It's been really hard to like move people across. But the global system has got loads of stuff set up that allows for much more interaction across from people all over the world, basically, mostly through Mattermost.
I was wondering, Claire, when you first started, when you were just a few people, how were you then taking decisions? How many were you, and how were you actually taking collective decisions?
Well, I would say a huge amount of the sort of original plans came from a handful of people. So I worked with Charlie and Clive on the design stuff, and we picked up that and like worked with our friend Miles to make the identity, the look and feel, do all of that stuff. And we were very free to do it. We were working a lot from research that Roger had been doing on how civil disobedience works, nonviolent theory, revolutionary history, and on, all the stuff he'd been looking at. Gail had done a significant amount of research in decentralized organizing, different structures, a whole bunch of people who'd done loads of direct action, who had loads of experience in doing that work. Certain people that were working with regenerative cultures work, that were able to sort of input on all of that stuff. And so in a way, I guess we sort of, enough people elected to do this work as a project based on a paper that was presented by Roger to the network. So there was a network of activists all over the UK that was already doing small campaigns that was called Rising Up. And I was part of that, just doing something in London, and other people were part of it doing stuff all over the UK. And it was, a lot of it was to do with social justice, economic justice, tax justice, anti-fracking, you know, anti-oil investment, the list goes on. Roger presented a paper to that group called Pivoting to the Real Issue, which basically said, if we lose the Arctic and we lose control of the climate, then your social justice issues won't matter, because we're going to have civilizational collapse. So why don't we get the whole system on one project with the main aim of focusing on like climate and ecological emergency? So we came together, enough people agreed to do that. Not everyone in the whole system came on board, but enough people came along with that sort of proposal to say, let's do this. And I can't remember how the decisions were made at the very early stages, but it was like, technically we'll have a rebellion. That's what it'll be. That I can't remember how that decision was made, but that was definitely a decision. And we'll do it with this sort of holacratic inspired way of working. And yeah, I can't remember how we made major decisions in the very early stages, because I think there were so few people that we just kind of agreed to do stuff and work out how to do it and then go, yeah, let's try. over time, we've worked with deliberative decision making. So I don't know if you know that kind of process. It can be a bit slow, but if you're in a smallish group, it can work really well. So if someone's got a proposal, they go, this is my proposal, this is what I think we should do. And then you go round, the facilitator takes you round the room one at a time and asks you for any, what is the word? I think they ask for kind of, there's stages to it. So they ask everyone for feedback or reactions. And then, do you know this one, Matt? Am I going to get all these stages wrong? And then
no, I don't know this one specifically.
And then you might ask everybody if they've got any objections. So you ask everybody one by one, do you have any objections? And if someone objects, they have to object on the grounds that it's going to cause harm, basically. And if it's going to cause some harm and they'd like an amendment, they can say to the proposer, will you accept this amendment? I think I could agree to it if you change this. And then see if the person who's brought it is willing to change it in that way. And if they are, then you do another round of objections to see if everyone will agree to it then. It's kind of like that. You go round and round the room again and again to hear from everybody, and then to make sure that absolutely nobody objects to it. So it's quite a good way of like making a decision that everyone's happy with. But I guess it's like not something that would work on our Friday meetings, for example, when you might have like 50 people that don't know each other. And you also need to have a proposal in advance, ideally, where you've had time to look at it and think about it before you come in the room. Because unless it's a very simple thing, it's not very good to put people on the spot with something like, and they have to decide right there and then. It's quite good to give it to people the day before or something like that. So that's kind of a major way that we make decisions.
And plus, we have every week new people can join. We don't have a kind of set number of people, or and we don't know each other. But I think what is similar in a way is that we do have a paper in a way that was written. I mean, we do that, and that's a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Simona is next, or did you already speak?
Well, I already spoke.
Okay.
I just on this last thing I wanted to say. I was in a group in Bologna, not the N25, a former group, and where we took decisions this way, and it was quite easy. You just need a smaller group to prepare the job, and just to get to the meeting with a draft already almost finished. It didn't take so much of time doing it this way. Sorry for.
I think I'm next on Stack, and the comment I had was, I used to work in the U.S. government for Medicare, or healthcare for older people. And I would facilitate all these big interactions within like the agency and between our agency and Social Security and all this stuff. And communication was horrible. Like, it's a big controlled hierarchy. You had all this communication and it was horrible. And like one of the things I had to do was make all these dashboards for like bosses way up, and they would have all this information so they would know what's going on. But it was so shallow, and there was no way for like that person on top to actually have any understanding. It was just kind of like a significant amount of bullshit work. But the kind of the point being is, like, I think big hierarchies in corporations or governments have a big illusion of people say they know what's going on, but they don't in short. So it's like maybe almost an encouragement to say, you guys are probably, you just have less facade about that you know what's going on than actual hierarchy.
There's a lot of places where there's no facade about the fact that we don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, at least I live in companies. companies always say they know what's going on, which is not true. But
Yeah.
at least you guys are more honest about it.
Yeah. Well, and it's so obvious to me that like the whole thing is totally reliant on like trust and on human relationships. And so one of the things that people tried to institute that's never quite managed to work, but in theory it probably is good, is like between two teams that need to work together, having two links rather than one. So like if I'm the person that goes to political circle, they should also have a person that comes to my meetings as well. So we attend each other's meetings with different people. So we have a double link between teams that need to work together. It's a good idea, but we do really struggle to like service that need because we just end up in so many meetings, and then you're just in meetings all day and you can't do any work. Like my friend just said to me the other day that she looked at her diary from just before Christmas and she was scheduled for 22 hours worth of regular weekly meetings every week. So we're as a team now trying to work out how we reduce the time that we spend in meetings, but it's really difficult because if the whole system works on personal links, you've got to go to those fucking meetings. Otherwise, how else are you going to find out what's going on? You know, and it's very well and good having like minutes, notes, documents, blah, blah. But like, also I'm just overrun with documents. So sometimes I'm like, I can't read any more docs. That's why I struggle with the museum email threads. Sometimes I lose track of things because I've got so much incoming already that it gets, you know, I've got WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Mattermost, 2 email addresses, and, you know, blah, blah. So it just gets like, I can't take in any more data in like the amount of hours that I'm awake. So that is a bit of a problem as well, information overload of how do you stop people from seeing things they don't need to see and getting overwhelmed, but how do you make information flow work well? So I'm like very open about the fact that we have not fucking worked that out, like how to do that well. Like it's just ever a problem. I don't know if anyone else has ever like won on that front, but it is it seems to be quite a challenge.
I think Gabby was next. Maybe not.
Hey, I wanted to ask Claire if she has one quick advice for Museum of Care at the stage that we're at, even if it's like you're on your own view as Claire. So one advice for us or two.
I think to try and get into a platform as soon as possible where things are all in one place. I think we'll like the Discord plan. I think to get people in there into a place where you can know where things are to go and look so that you don't lose stuff in threads that you're not on, emails that you didn't ever see or receive, or, you know, and be my major advice to try not to, if you do go onto one platform with it in that way, to try not to do something which sometimes feels quite convenient, like set up a cheeky WhatsApp group. Because WhatsApp is absolutely like the hell of XR UK on WhatsApp. Is like just so it's so much, it's like, and it never stops, especially when you have an international chat. It literally never goes to sleep, and that can be quite stressful because you just sometimes want things to just stop going ping. I know you can turn the ping off, but you always know on your phone it's always going, pay me attention, pay me attention, pay me attention, I've got another message. And these, you know, all these sort of designs that are based on addiction, basically. So I would try and avoid WhatsApp as much as possible.
I think it's, do you think it's important for us to have a set of values more? So we have the manifesto. Do you think we need principles?
You could do. I haven't looked at the manifesto for a bit, so I'd probably have a different opinion if I had it in front of me. But in theory, I think it's helpful to just explore some of the things that you will and won't do, for example. But again, because it's such a different project, it doesn't I don't feel like I've got very much wisdom about it, because my experience of doing this is trying to design a system that can go out and cause loads of trouble and get loads of people arrested and put in prison. And that's quite a different type of design to this one, hopefully. So it's so in that way, you know, we had to I've often said XR is like designed in the same way like terrorism is, right? Like, you know, if you want to go out and you're part of ISIS, you go, I think this, I want to kill people. That's how you make the flag, off you go, you know. That it's cells that can self-replicate and go off and do whatever they like, and they're completely free to do it, right? So that's in its design. Obviously, we say no harm to anyone, non-violent, peaceful, respectful, blah, blah, blah. So it couldn't be more different in the actuality of how it happens. But the system design is somewhat similar. And that means it's a high risk system, because anyone can just make a flag and go out and say that they're acting on behalf of my movement. But actually, they might go and say something that I think is completely wrong. And then it's very difficult for me to say they're not me, because they had the flag. And everyone might go, but that is you. And the only thing you've got then to say it's not is you've got this list of things, and you say, well, they broke our rules, so it's not us. It's someone pretending to be us. And we don't know who they are, so it's not us. So you only have that really to reassure yourself that you can say it's not you. So it's high risk in that way by design. And that's because it's responding to a very high risk scenario. And everything that's been embodied in the design is on the understanding that we're in a very short time frame, which we need to like do maximum impact work. And, you know, it's responding in that way. And so I think there's probably something much smarter that we could do, but I don't know what that would sort of be a bit more thorough, or maybe a bit more open even, I don't know. But it's a challenge, I think, to work out how to do that. And often I think when people try and align around purpose, it's can tear people apart, because actually what that person thinks is right and what that person thinks this is for isn't exactly the same. And when you try to get people to come together as big group and say, we all agree on the purpose and the way that we want to work, they might not agree. So you end up having lots of arguments then, rather than everyone being able to run over their differences and work together despite them, which is also what the purpose of XR was to do, to say, let's all work together. I don't have to agree with you about everything. I just have to agree with you that we need a non-violent, peaceful, transformative, very rapid movement that turns this shit around. And I don't want to take power. I want to put it in the hands of other citizens. Cool, let's go. You can argue about everything else along the way, but it doesn't mean you can't work together. Whereas if you sit down and try to agree everything like that, it can be hard. And I think that was the beauty of having quite a lot of this stuff handed to me by other people, basically, who'd done a lot of research, like the people who wrote the principles and values. I had nothing to do with them, but they seemed perfectly good to me and I trusted them. So we just went with them. That's fine. Let's go with that. And because we built the framework with a small group, and I think museum is still small enough to do that. But if you end up with like lots of people who all want to have an input on that type of stuff, you find it very difficult to meet everybody's needs in a way. Do you know what I mean? The bigger the group, the more different the needs might be from different people. And then bringing that stuff to a coherent sort of agreement can get more and more difficult, especially when it's around like purpose, I think. Go on, Nika.
Yeah, so first of all, I think Museum of Care should try to be very similar to XR and take high risk. And I think XR has like, I didn't actually know and I didn't understand a lot. So maybe I will ask you later to not be repetitive about how this international movement run.
Yeah.
Maybe I go and talk to them. Maybe that would be a nice idea to invite one of them and to interview them. If you can arrange that, that will be amazing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because So I think you do have a different platforms, like international movements have their platform, maybe somebody in Ghana using WhatsApp exclusively, you know, you have a problem in the UK. So I think in this particular conversation, we should separate what you're describing as a setup and decision-making process for the global movement and what is going on in the UK. It just happens because you grew up from the UK. It's kind, and you were in the beginning. It's mixed up. So I think Museum of Case also has his sense of urgency, because we are talking about setting up a different symbolic values in a society. And if you're talking about museum as a contemporary churches that was born with national states and represents all the you know, values and problems that we're dealing with, then it's very, very compatible to what XR is doing. But in the same time, because we grew up from Carnival so quickly, we act as we are like a small cell somewhere in Scotland, one of the, you know, setup of XR, and because like we didn't have this academic papers that was prepared before that lay down everything. So we are trying to negotiate with the people who happen to be there, who is like, you know, very, like we all met very recently, you know, every detailed of the overall design. So but I think urgency is there, and the continuation is there. The one thing that should be defined is Extinction Rebellion is, correct me if I'm wrong, is as well as a DEM25 is a lobbyist group, because you set up to change government policies, and you have to do it quickly, otherwise we all fucked up. You know, you can't, and you have to take a risk because they keep polluting and so on. So it will be bad pretty soon. But Museum of Care has a different different message, different texture. So it's Carnival has this sense of urgency. Museum of Care, at least now, doesn't. So if the group united around certain event, like visual assembly or this documentary, then it's clear what everybody should do. And then you can set up a small groups that could decide, and you can navigate the decision-making process, because we all will have the same purpose clearly. But if we talk about something very vast, like let's build a new civilization, let's go to Mars, let's research an alien life that may be around us, then it's a different story.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess
am I right?
what you could think about in a way, what I was saying earlier about needing to put a date in the diary, which is never like perfect for everybody, then if you took that as one like idea of like a totally crucial decision that XR has to make as a nation, or even as a local group, if you're going to do an action, you have to decide when, then maybe that's an interesting sort of experiment to think about for the museum, because if we only had to make one decision a year and that was like a date, then could all the projects do something on that date together, like we've been talking about doing this, you know, on the Carnival kind of anniversary this year. So maybe that's also interesting to see because some of those decisions are quite small. I mean, they're quite like pointed thing, just need a number, there you go. But that changes everything. And then if you have a system that's going to collectively work towards one time, but not all on one project, well, then that's maybe something interesting that we could think about as a similarity, actually, because for that particular date, I would have a legal team doing a certain amount of work, or we would have an action team doing a certain amount of work, or a families group doing a certain amount of work. They're all going to converge on that same point, but just in XR, it would also be in the same place. But you could do a similar thing with the carnival anniversary, I guess, for the museum.
Yeah.
Any project could do any offering on that day, and it would give everybody a point of sort of convergence, which might actually be quite an interesting way to think about the dynamic of the system. How does it choose to do things together in a way, you know? I don't know. The one thing that I just meant to say about WhatsApp is that actually a lot of people that I know in Africa use WhatsApp and they don't use anything else. So there was a problem when the global team that was mostly like European techies, and they were like, we've set up this fantastic thing that everyone can organize on, and it's a closed space, it makes everything work, and it's on renewable energy servers and blah, blah, blah. A whole load of people in the global south were like, we can't use that. We do everything on WhatsApp. That's it. That's it. So there is actually an exclusivity issue to sometimes using things like Discord if you can't engage with the people that in certain parts of the world because they've got limited access to bandwidth or technology or whatever. So that's just to correct myself on what I said about what I don't like WhatsApp because it's kind of gone a bit out of control. But I think for some people it is how they organize, and that's just true, and it might need to be facilitated. So just to correct myself. What can you do that, TJ?
Yes, one can, unfortunately.
Oh, amazing. Great, all right. Thank God for TJ.
You can have both apps that just, you get all your messages twice now. That'd be great.
No, don't do it. Oh my goodness. Cool. Well, are we good? I feel like I've been talking for ages.
Wow,
maybe
that's
we're
amazing.
gonna go
Is
and
it
have a
possible
rest.
to kind of confirm that we can have an interview with somebody from the Global Extinction Rebellion? Because I didn't think about that. That's a big field that you guys have is now different structure, you know.
Yeah, I'll ask somebody to come along to a meeting sometime and meet us. Maybe a separate meeting, not a Friday. Or do you want me to see if they'll come to a Friday and do a little presentation? It just won't be so long on a Friday. Maybe it should be a separate call like this we can record.
Yeah, maybe separate. That is Friday also good. And also I want to invite Simona to talk about M25 if it's possible.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure it's possible. I mean, not in a public recorded meeting,
Okay.
because many things are internal, and I don't feel like to discuss them in public. But yes, there are some lessons to be taken from the M25. It can be interesting too.
Maybe in this case we can do also 9 people meeting, but then we are not publishing it online, but we first editing it and then we show you the edit, and then if you confirm part, then we publish that. So maybe that will be the good way to go. Yeah. Originally, Anka proposed to just do the personal interviews and put it all on YouTube. Everybody do it, but now it looks like we're still doing things collectively. So, for example, I wanted to invite people from Iceland and from Chile, and so from Chile, it's also Gabi. So she's a student of David, one favorite student of David. She's now doing a fieldwork, anthropology fieldwork in Chile. And so we actually have a meeting on Saturday at 1 o'clock, because the original proposal was to do it one-on-one. And I have a person who is setting up the sound, but I can open it up and send an email around. And if somebody wants to join, I think it's really cool when we have many people asking the questions, because it's actually much more interesting, you know.
Yeah.
So,
collective interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. So this Saturday it's at 1 o'clock, and if you guys have time, please join us. she's a really cool person, very smart. And in Chile, it was a big, like I think they went from some kind of breakthrough of how so many people can make decisions together.
How do we join?
Oh, we just set up. I'm sorry about Zoom things today.
That's all right.
We fucked up. Really sorry. But it's like we have like my Zoom set up, the same one. So please join that one. But I will send an email around, or just pop up Saturday, 1 o'clock.
Cool. All right then. Well, shall I get this recording over to you, Anka? Is that okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks
Brilliant.
so much, Claire.
Thanks. It's really nice to see you all.
Good. Nice
Thank
to see
you very much. Nice to see you.
Really informative.
Bye.
See you
Thank you. Bye.
you soon.
Bye.
soon. Bye, loves. Bye.
Bye.